Okay, PAGBAM Talks. It is good morning in Buenos Aires, Argentina. It is good earlier afternoon in London, and it's good afternoon later in Geneva. Today we're joined by two very distinguished lawyers, whom I'm happy to introduce right now. One of them is a client to two of the lawyers here, and that is José Guido Olivier, who is now in Switzerland, in Geneva. José is a senior legal counsel overseeing M&As and strategic investments for the Mercuria Energy Group. He is an Argentine lawyer, has been here working at a law firm, and then he moved in-house in 2007 to the Mercuria Energy Group based in Geneva, where they have their headquarters. As the Mercuria global presence expanded, he was also acting legal head for the Southeast Asia business in 2010-2011. Mercuria is one of the four largest privately owned energy traders with a turnover in excess of 100 billion. The core business of the group is trading of physical commodities. It has diversified in different fields and businesses throughout the world. It has a presence in 28 countries, so you can imagine José as in-house counsel dealing with 28 law firms throughout the world. And it has an access to global trading flows via 37 trading and operation platforms. José is a former pupil from my school, so we have a little bit of a difference between the years when he was there and I was there, but anyway, I'm very glad to have him join us. On the other side, in London, we have Will Breeze. Will is at the firm Herbert Smith Freehills. He specializes in natural resources, finance work, with a particular focus on oil and gas matters. He has acted for sponsors, project developers, lenders, trading houses, and credit guarantors. William has been recommended by Legal 500, by International Finance Law Review 1000, and by Legal 500 in several years. One of the impressive CV of Will, one of the things that drew my attention was that the Legal 500 made some comments on his personality, saying he was calm, pleasant, and patient. And that goes to what we will be talking about later on, probably, on the personal relationship with a lawyer. Will, of course, works for Mercuria, and so does our law firm here in Argentina work for Mercuria. So José is our client. On the other hand, Will also works for a whole lot of other clients. So José is working internationally with a lot of law firms, and Will is working internationally with a lot of clients. Will's interests, other than work, is food, wining and dining, and I think José, Will, and myself, we're all aligned in that sort of interest. Sadly, Will, being myself a Cambridge person, went to that other place. But anyway, we do have friends from that other place. Will likes cycling, traveling, and is very happy here to join us in this chat that we will have amongst us. And to start, I would like to mention something, an anecdote that happened the other day. It was about a couple of Sundays ago. I was sitting at a lunch, and I had three 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds, a dentist, an engineer, and a person who has studied economics and working in a bank. And I asked them, looking forward to these next 30 years, do you think you will be needing more lawyering or less lawyering? The three of them actually mentioned that they thought that there would be an intense need for lawyers in the future. They talked about privacy issues, they talked about malpractice, they talked about contracts, they talked about KYC. They saw higher regulation in many fields coming forward. But it's very interesting that they saw for the next years this sort of pattern developing. So with that, I probably ask Jose to start off, saying what you think of these views.
Hi, Alan. Hi, Will. Alan, thanks very much for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here, having this chat today. To your question, I actually agree with these individuals' views that you expressed about there being definitely a need for lawyering in the next 30 years, but I think I would just qualify that by saying it's going to become, in my view, more specific. And that's also a consequence of digitalization and the fact that a lot of the advice that perhaps law firms currently give will become, either through artificial intelligence or other form, it will be more standard and digitalized. So I think when a client will need to instruct external counsel, it will really be for something extremely specific. And that's where I think it perhaps differs slightly from what perhaps practice was up to now. But I agree with that view. I don't see there being less of a need for lawyers, but quite the contrary.
Thank you, Jose. The idea here is to visualize what the clients will be like in the next 30 years. As you know, PAGBAM has just had its 30th birthday, so we're looking forward. And when you look at clients in the future, you're looking to see what their needs from law firms will be. Do you think, Will, that this issue on the quarantines and the pandemia has made a shift in the way we are working with clients? And will this have an impact moving forward?
Thanks, Alan, and happy birthday to PAGBAM. It's a good question. It's driven the need for more technology, first of all. I think that's something that clients expect from lawyers is obviously legal skills and knowledge of their market, but we can now add to that list the ability to be completely conversant with Teams, Zoom, Skype, whatever it might be. The ability to communicate like this and have remote interaction is something that now all clients expect of all their lawyers. And then separately from that, something else that's come from the pandemic is there are two aspects. One is that there's greater availability. There's been a real blurring of the lines between home and work. Yes, a lot of us are used to working at weekends and working in the evenings already. I think that's increased. On the other side to that, because you're not in the office all the time, clients do recognize that you might actually be doing something else. You might not be available at a certain hour because you're doing something else. So it's the 2 points there is that you're expected to be available more often, but there's a greater understanding of if you're not available at a certain time. And I think that's just going to continue going forward.
Thank you, Will. There is a question which comes to my mind, and that is, what sort of demands do you think will come from us lawyers? And some people say that lawyers have to, be multitasking or multi-talents or multidisciplinary. I have read somewhere that lawyers will be required to have skills in other competencies and play roles as crisis managers, project managers, risk managers, process designers. Do you see that happening in the future, Jose? Do you see the role of the outside counsel and the advice going beyond just the legal risk analysis?
Yes, Alan. Interesting. Yes, interesting enough. I do think so.
Will, any thoughts on that?
I completely agree, Alan, with both you and Jose. It's not just being a lawyer. So in terms of project management, it's being able to run a transaction of whatever sort it might be, whether it's a project financing or a piece of litigation. But it's not simply delivering legal advice. It's assisting the client in running the process and making that as smooth as possible. Crisis management is another important one, whether that is around human rights issues, whether it's around specific litigation points. I think climate change is driving that more and more. And so the role of the lawyer is to be available to the client to assist when something really bad, something catastrophic happens. It's being there to support the client should that crisis arise. And then, as you say, it's also having technical skills, sort of financial ability. I think no longer can a lawyer say that he or she doesn't understand a formula in a contract. You have to be able to get a grip with that and understand what a formula might say, so you can put that into words. So yes, it's no longer just being a black letter lawyer. The job is a lot more fulsome and complex than that.
Thank you. There is this question on the client needs, and sort of, you know, lawyers will be expected to be more focused, more involved, and you know, having a very good understanding of the client's business and being aligned, especially with in-house counsel like Jose. Jose, how have you seen this come through? We mentioned in the introduction, or you mentioned to me, that Mercuria has gone into a whole lot of different businesses. Have you seen that have an effect on the lawyers that you use or the firms that you use, given all these different types of business that Mercuria's got involved into?
Yes, Alan, most certainly. Whereas at the beginning, or rather than at the beginning, when it's a very specific matter, you would instruct counsel who has that specific skill set. But as the business has become ever more interrelated, or at least the different lines of businesses we look to instruct external counsel that have, if not all, most of the capabilities. It's always easier, and that's why, again, we many times have instructed Will, we've instructed HSF, and we've instructed PAGBAM. At least the type of law firm that we as clients like or prefer is precisely a law firm with all these capacities and with perfect communication between the different teams and the different skill sets.
Thank you, Jose. One of the things, again, Jose, is the question on the coverage. You know, of course, Will works internationally. We work more locally, but we see higher demands of having some sort of, you know, network or connections with different firms in different parts of the world. Do you see that sort of ever increasing, Jose? And Will, how do you, I know, you know, your firm has different offices in different countries, but how do you see this developing in the future with the countries that you're not represented? Or is Herbert Smith Freehills going to be setting up offices all over the world?
It's two strands to that, Alan, again. First of all, yes, we've got a very strong international network, and further expansion is always under review. Where we don't have a capacity of our own, we have firms that we know and that we work with, and we can recommend to clients who we think is the best firm for a particular transaction. And perhaps more importantly, who we think is the best lawyer for a particular transaction. And it's working with firms in these jurisdictions that we know and trust, and that we can be confident will deliver the same level of service and responsiveness and legal capability that we can provide to Jose and to other clients, of course, making sure that they get as seamless an offering as possible. And I think that's an important aspect as well, working very closely, not just with my colleagues and internally and around the network, but also with law firms in other jurisdictions, so that the client gets as sort of one-stop service as possible.
Jose, how do you feel about this? You have often asked me, you know, do you know a firm in Peru or Ecuador or Panama or something like that? I mean, you already have presence in 28 countries, but you do business with a whole lot of other countries. What's your view on this, Jose?
Yes, we do business with a whole lot more than the 28 countries in which we're present. And I think, to your question, Alan, I think for the client, the network that a particular law firm has is critical. Without that network, I think, or law firms that can't, unless it's a very, very, very specific matter, for the rest, for a large firm, if they don't have the network, I don't think they'll survive in the next 30 years. I think the network is critical. And we've worked many times, I'll give as example, Alan, when we've done business in different parts of Latin America. I mean, in a way, we use PAGBAM as our go-to firm for Latin America, and then we always ask Alan and the different partners at PAGBAM whether, for, like you mentioned, Ecuador, do you have anyone you would recommend? And if you do recommend a firm, someone in that firm specifically, I think that's also, Alan, because you and PAGBAM know the type of risk profile we as a client or Mercuria has, so you know exactly the type of lawyers we need, the type of advice we're looking for. And I mean, with Will, I mean, we've also had that many times. We've worked and we instruct perhaps HSF to coordinate. I'll give an example on an M&A transaction that has cross-border elements. We instruct, in that case, Will and his team, saying, right, you'll be the point of contact, you'll be overseeing the transaction, but for the different cross-border elements, we'll rely on you to at least suggest a firm and coordinate with that different firm. And that's where I think for the law firm, having that network is critical.
Thank you, Jose. Yes, that sort of, you know, goes in line with the intense alignment with the client needs. There is one of the issues which, you know, which comes up, questions on clients requiring that law firms assisting them have, you know, certain policies. Gender and diversity, I mean, that's a given. We know that is already something that's in place, and that most of the firms are complying with that. But how do you feel about environmental policies and targets? Recycling, energy efficiency, carbon emissions. Do you see that becoming a requirement demanded by clients to law firms? What's your view on this, Will, in your firm?
Yes, Alan, increasingly we do. We get clients asking, as you say, about gender diversity, racial diversity, sometimes social background of the teams we're putting forward and the firm more widely, pay differences at different levels of the firm between genders. But then looking more broadly, as you said, on the environmental aspects, yes, it's around the level of recycling we have, our carbon emissions levels. As a firm, we've got a commitment to net zero by 2030. So that covers everything from, for example, sourcing renewable electricity in as many offices as we can, only using recycled paper, cutting down on the number of computer screens we have and the number of printers we have, going to that level of sort of granularity on the steps we're taking. And it's driven, I think, yes, by clients, obviously, but also by the requirements of our teams themselves. The trainees and associates coming through the ranks now view this as something that is very, very important in a way that, frankly, the older member of the firms aren't so attuned to or haven't been so attuned to. So yeah, it's a requirement internally and from clients that on the environmental side we do better and better and better.
Jose, do you view Mercuria sort of demanding this from the law firms? We've had some banks here that say to us, you know, unless you have these policies in place, you cannot carry on being our lawyers. Do you see your group moving in that direction also?
Yes, Alan, certainly. We have a distinct preference when instructing counsel, that it's counsel and firms that abide and believe in our core values. And all of these and the ones that Will was mentioning is, I mean, it'll be actually what will determine whether or not we'll instruct a firm. If there's a firm that's not compliant or is a bit lax on all of these, then we'll look elsewhere.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, one of the things looking forward into the future in the next 30 years, and I'm sure Will find this interesting, is what about the big accounting firms? There is, you know, a sort of encroachment or moving into our fields by the large accounting firms who are taking up some, you know, legal advice areas, M&As or similar. Do you see this, you know, sort of increasing in the future, or do you see that, you know, local regulations will sort of make a difference between what an accounting firm carries out and what a law firm carries out? What's your view from London, Will?
Well, Alan, it's a great question and very topical. Taking the second aspect first, I think that where regulations allow multidisciplinary partnerships, so firms that can offer accounting services, legal services, consulting services, whatever it might be, there's obviously scope for those firms to compete. So taking the example of the Big Four, we're not yet seeing them on top ticket M&A work or big financings or heavy duty litigation. Where they're really active at the moment is in the sort of the mid-market territory, where they can bring the capabilities they have to bear to execute work at that level and at a price that clients are happy with. And I think one very big strength of the Big Four is their ability to cross-sell. They can say to a client, if you're doing a piece of M&A, we can do the accounting, we can do consulting, we can do financial advisory, and we can do the legal work. So I think that's a real plus for them. One potential downside is scope for conflicts, because the Big Four are active in so many spheres, doing so much other work, that could produce conflicts when it comes to legal work. But yeah, certainly we are, I was having this discussion with some of my partners only a couple of weeks ago. We are keeping a careful eye on the Big Four because they've got scope to be genuinely impressive competitors.
Jose, how do you feel about that? I mean, do the accountants do one work, or auditors, and the lawyers do other work? I mean, is there a clear distinction for you as a client between what each one will do?
Yes, as a client, we do have a distinction. We tend to prefer, I mean, and it's just a preference we have. We tend to prefer perhaps to get an accounting firm to do the accounting side, a law firm to give legal advice. At times, and Will has mentioned, in some deals where, for example, we've started with an accounting review by an auditing firm, where we've seen there is scope for some legal advice and they're able to provide it. At times it becomes efficient and it makes sense cost-wise that it's that same, in that case, that same one of the Big Fours, with one of the Big Four rather, that gives that other advice, but we still tend to have a preference to keep things separate.
Okay, and a little bit sort of going into this client and lawyer relationship. Jose, how do you see in-house work versus outside work? Do you think that will there be an increase in work which is sort of produced internally? You as an in-house counsel are managing this, or do you see sort of more outsourcement going to the law firms? How do you visualize that for the future?
I think it's something that's important to bear in mind is these days also cost management is paramount, and to the client, of course, we do see a lot more work being done in-house, and which is why what I was alluding to earlier is when we do instruct external counsel, it's going to be more and more in the future on very specific matters. But to your question, Alan, yes, I do see more work being done in-house, which is not to say there won't be that the client won't be instructing law firms to do work, but I think the instructions will be ever more on very specific matters.
I think, Will, that probably there'll be more work in-house, but there'll be more work different types of work outside. Would you agree with that, looking towards the future?
Absolutely, Alan. Yeah. So I think that more and more is being asked of in-house lawyers. I think, I know from talking to Jose that he used to be really busy 5 years ago. Impossible though it sounds, he's actually even busier now. And I think that's, sadly for Jose, going to just increase and increase. I think that also means a greater need, as you both said, for external law firms to be there to assist and to help on specific matters or horrendously complex bits of work where in-house counsel are juggling so much stuff that they need somebody else there simply to assist with the specific matters and maybe a very complicated piece of M&A or whatever it might be. That's where external counsel has a role to play. But it goes also back to your 3 30-year-olds, Alan, recognizing the need for ever more legal services. There's going to be more work for in-house lawyers. There'll be more work for external counsel as well.
Yeah, exactly. We mentioned this at the beginning, and I was very surprised to see that, Legal 500 in 2020, it says 2022, but I guess it's projecting forward, qualifies Will as calm, pleasant, and patient. So, they're focusing on personal traits, on the person more than the professional. So, Jose, does this continue to be a relationship business at its core? sort of reliable connection between people. Someone said, you know, it's infrastructural, that is the service that you have to provide, and emotional, you know, getting along with the person. I think you mentioned something of this at the beginning, but maybe you can sort of round this off if possible.
Yes, Alan, I actually thought you were going to ask me whether or not that assessment on Will was accurate. And yes, he is a very calm lawyer. I've not seen him lose his temper to date. I think the personal skills and the relationships are also, again, very important. As a client, you not only look when instructing or relying on advice from outside counsel at perhaps a fantastic resume or CV, or you've got the list of deals that the law firms, you know, carried out in the last year or the rest, but I also pay particular attention to the lawyers working on the team we instruct. For example, you start by the partner, the relationship partner, and how that person is, whether or not he understands your need as a client. I think it's the personal skills and that for us determine whether we like a team we work with, and whether we will instruct them again. I mean, it's happened at times. We make mistakes, and sometimes we've instructed counsel that have disappointed us, and not necessarily on the advice in itself, although that does happen from time to time. But just on the personal front, at times you're like, well, working with those lawyers, or that lawyer in particular, wasn't necessarily a pleasant experience, so you won't repeat and won't instruct again.
Thank you, Jose. What's your view, Will, if you can tell us calmly, pleasantly, and patiently on the personal relationship issue?
I will endeavour to do so, Alan. I think that a client, like I said earlier, a client takes as read the fact that their lawyers are technically good, that they have market knowledge and sector knowledge, and that these days, of course, they are able to work with IT. So, as you both said, the relationship is really important, and I think that comes down to responsiveness. It comes down to understanding what the client wants, and a point Jose mentioned, the client's risk appetite is a good point to consider. It's being there for little things, little bits of advice, making referrals, whatever it might be. Sort of that's relationship management. And then also it's taking the time to call a client when you're not doing a deal with them. It is visiting them if you're in different places, which despite the use of Zoom and Teams and everything else, I think that meeting in person is really important. A, because nothing beats that, and B, because you have a far better quality of relationship if you're meeting for coffee or over lunch or over dinner. It goes beyond the purely professional to personal, to building up a relationship, which leads to trust. And I think that's really important for in-house counsel, is to feel that they can trust their external lawyers to be there for them when they need to, and to have the client's best interests at heart. Absolutely.
Couldn't agree with you more. Well, I think we're sort of coming up to the end of our time. The idea was to have very informal chat amongst us. Just before signing off, I would ask you to say some final comments. And our dear client here, Jose, I would like to mention that with Will we have worked on a deal for Jose some years back, and we've worked on some other deals. So, we have been in contact before. But anyway, Jose, some final comments on what you as a client will be looking to in the next 30 years?
Sure, Alan. And firstly, I mean, it was rude of me. I forgot to congratulate PAGBAM on these 30 years. So there goes. Apologies. I should have said that at the beginning. And I think if I had to focus on what the client will need in the next 30 years, I think it has to do with, the networking the client has, aside from the competences, of course. I think it's the networking. It's, as Will said, it's these days, a client expects a reply, and if it's an urgent matter, they don't care what time of the day it is, they will expect a reply. And if for whatever reason, given the time zone, that particular lawyer or that team can't, they'll expect another team to be working on it to give that reply. So I think that's important to bear in mind. Another aspect Will mentioned, which is being technologically capable is going to be critical. It can't just be lawyers who can only work on Word, as up to now many times were the case. It needs to be, they need to be able to handle everything on this, and particularly now in these times as COVID has shown us, sometimes we're having meetings on Zoom or on Teams. So I think that's also an important element. But it seems like I'm focusing on just purely mechanical things. I think nonetheless, the personal aspect of the relationship with the lawyer on the other side is very important, and that will remain so, I think.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jose. Will, some final comments?
I think it's, in addition to everything Jose has just said, I think it's the ability to deliver legal services at a cost that the client is happy with. There's ever more pressure on costs internally at clients, and that feeds through to what they expect from their law firms. We've got to deliver legal services at least as good as we always have, but at an ever lower cost, or be able to deal with increasingly complex matters, but at no greater cost than before. And I think that's certainly a challenge. And then you're looking at automation, artificial intelligence, alternative sort of low-cost legal services in lower-cost jurisdictions. From a private practice lawyer's perspective, you're looking at a number of different things in the toolbox to deliver what the client needs, and certainly delivering what the client needs at the price the client is not too unhappy with is the most important thing.
Thank you very much. I always find it very difficult to end, the Zooms, sort of the endings, they're not like we hug each other after a meeting or something like that. So all I can say is I would like to thank you very much, both of you. It was really, illuminating and interesting, this conversation. To the audience, I just want to clear up that this was a completely informal. This has not been worked on before. The questions just came up as we went along in the conversation. And, well, all I can say on an ending note is I hope we will get together and have dinner and wine in 3 places: Buenos Aires, Geneva, and London, in a not too distant future. So to all of you, I thank you very much and hope to see you soon, and we keep in touch. Good day to you all.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jose.